Olivia Parker was 12 days into what she once believed would be the happiest chapter of her life. At 34, she had built a quiet routine around her little flower shop in downtown Portland, and marrying Evan Sterling felt like the final piece of a gentler future she had long prayed for. That night, Evan surprised her with a reservation at an upscale restaurant overlooking the river. The soft glow of candlelight, the jazz trio in the corner, the scent of rosemary drifting from the kitchen all blended into a picture-perfect evening. Evan excused himself to answer a work call, brushing a quick kiss across her cheek before stepping away. Olivia watched him disappear around the corner, still smiling to herself. Then a chair scraped beside her. A woman she recognized from her shop, Irene Porter, leaned closer. Her silver hair trembled. Her eyes were wide with urgency. Without a word, Irene placed a folded stack of bills on the table and whispered, barely audible over the music, "Take this money. Leave now. Do not wait for him. Please, child. Just run." Olivia froze. Confusion stole her breath. Irene had always been soft-spoken, gentle, the kind of customer who asked for pale hydrangeas and lingered over memories of her daughter. But tonight there was fear in her voice, real, desperate fear. Before Olivia could respond, Irene pushed back her chair and hurried out of the restaurant. The doors closed behind her. Olivia sat in shock, her pulse rising as two unfamiliar men stepped through the entrance and scanned the room. Their eyes landed on her, and the perfect evening shattered. The two men moved with a quiet confidence that made Olivia's stomach twist. They were not customers. They were not staff. They were looking for someone with purpose. And when their gaze locked onto hers, cold and deliberate, Olivia felt the air in her lungs turn thin. She stood quickly, her pulse thundering in her ears, and slipped toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. The soft music of the restaurant faded behind her, replaced by the sharp echo of her own footsteps. She ducked into the women's restroom and locked the door, bracing her hands against the counter to steady her shaking breath. She reached for her phone and ordered a cab, her fingers trembling so badly she had to read up her location twice. 3 minutes. The screen flashed. Arrival in 3 minutes. Olivia scanned the room for a window. There was one, but thick metal bars crossed it from end to end. She tested them anyway, pressing, pulling, hoping for a miracle. Nothing moved. Then a voice sounded outside the door. It was the restaurant manager. His tone was clipped, not the polite warmth he had shown earlier. "Ma'am, please stay inside. Everything is fine." Another voice followed, smooth, familiar. Olivia opened the door. "You're scaring people." "Evan." Her heart dropped. Something in his voice felt wrong, controlled, rehearsed, a sound she had never heard from him before. She stepped farther from the door just as the lock turned. They were opening it from the outside. Panic surged. With no other choice, Olivia lifted her purse and swung it into the fire alarm glass panel beside the mirror. On the second hit, the alarm screamed to life, and chaos erupted. The alarm sent the entire restaurant into a frantic wave of motion. Guests scrambled from their tables, servers shouted directions, and smoke from a kitchen mishap drifted through the air in thin gray ribbons. Olivia used the confusion to slip past the manager, pushing her way through the crowd until she burst out into the cold night. Her cab sat at the curb with its hazards blinking. She jumped in and slammed the door. "Drive. Please, just go." The driver didn't ask questions. The city blurred outside the windows as her breath came in rapid, shaking bursts. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow the panic clawing at her ribs. When the car finally stopped in front of her flower shop, she hurried inside and locked the door behind her. The familiar scent of lilies and fresh soil washed over her, but instead of comfort, it filled her with dread. She knew Evan would look for her here. She had only minutes. She ran to the small office in the back and flipped open her laptop. If she could transfer the money in her account to her old payroll card, the one Evan didn't know existed, she could at least protect something. Her bank app loaded. Her balance appeared. Relief flickered. She typed in the transfer amount, confirmed the numbers, entered the code sent to her phone. Transfer failed. Account restricted due to report filed by lawful spouse. Olivia stared at the message until the words blurred. Evan had frozen her accounts. Every dollar she had was now under his control. She slammed the laptop shut as a horrible realization sank in. Evan hadn't just found her. He had planned for this. And he was already stripping away everything she owned. Olivia left the flower shop through the back door, keeping to the shadows as she moved down the alley. She didn't know where else to go except home. Her apartment wasn't just a place to live, it was the last thing in her life untouched by Evan. Her parents had left it to her. No shared documents, no joint ownership, no way he could take it. That was what she believed. She reached the building, climbed the stairs 2 at a time, and fit her key into the lock. It didn't turn. She pulled it out. Tried again. The key scraped uselessly against the metal, refusing to enter. Her hand shook as she stepped back. A second lock, one she had never installed, gleamed beneath the old one. The door opened. A woman in a worn bathrobe stood in the doorway, her expression irritated and half asleep. "Yes?" she snapped. Olivia blinked. "I live here." The woman frowned. "Not anymore. I signed my lease last week. Talk to your landlord if you have an issue." A woman named Claudia Sterling. Olivia staggered back as if struck. Claudia, Evan's mother. Before she could speak, the woman closed the door. The locks clacked into place. Footsteps sounded behind her. Olivia turned to see Evan walking calmly down the hallway, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. Behind him stood Claudia, polished and composed, holding a folder. Claudia spoke with chilling softness. "You abandoned the property. We took legal action. Everything is documented." Evan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Stop resisting. The sooner you accept this, the easier it will be." Olivia felt the walls closing in. Neighbors peeked from cracked doors, watching, whispering. She was a stranger in her own home. With no escape and no one on her side, Olivia ran down the stairs, out the front door, into the cold night, because staying meant surrendering. And she wasn't ready to surrender. Olivia didn't stop running until her lungs burned and the city lights blurred through her tears. She wandered aimlessly for blocks, gripping her purse like a lifeline, afraid to slow down, afraid Evan might appear around any corner. Eventually she found a small 24-hour hostel wedged between a laundromat and a closed deli. It wasn't much, but it had a door and a lock. She paid in cash and collapsed on the thin mattress. When her hands finally stopped shaking, she scrolled through her phone until she found Irene Porter's number. The woman who had tried to warn her. The only person who had shown any sign of knowing the truth. Olivia pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. Then Irene's trembling voice answered. "Olivia, are you safe?" The question broke something inside her. "No, I don't know what to do." "Come to my house," Irene said immediately. "I'm sending you the address. Do not talk to anyone. Do not go anywhere else." A half-hour later, Olivia stood in front of a small blue bungalow with wind chimes swaying softly in the night breeze. Irene pulled her inside, locking the door the moment it shut. "Tell me everything," she urged. Olivia recounted the past few hours being locked in the restroom, the men at the restaurant, her frozen accounts, the stranger in her home, Claudia's lies. Irene listened, silent and pale. When Olivia finished, Irene clasped her hands tightly. "It's happening again," she whispered. Olivia froze. "Again?" Irene nodded slowly, eyes filling with grief. "My daughter Vera married Evan 3 years ago, and everything that is happening to you happened to her first." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "And she never came home." For a long moment, Olivia couldn't speak. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if Irene's words had pushed the walls inward. Vera hadn't survived. The truth settled over her like a sheet of ice. Irene wiped her eyes, steadier now, as though she had rehearsed this pain for years. Vera was bright, trusting, and Evan made her feel chosen, special, just like he did with you. Then his mother stepped in. Claimed she could help them organize finances. Vera signed a few papers, thinking it was routine. Olivia's stomach twisted. Papers. Evan had done the same thing to her documents he called harmless registration forms. Irene continued. Within months, Vera's accounts were inaccessible. Her rental studio was suddenly flagged for violations, and Claudia reassigned her lease to another tenant. All legal, all clean. On record, Vera looked irresponsible, unstable. "What happened to her?" Olivia whispered. Irene's voice cracked. "They said she drowned in a boating accident, but her body was never recovered, and Evan barely waited before moving on." Silence stretched between them. Then Irene reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded note. Vera wrote this the week before she disappeared. She mentioned something called the Gray Ledger. Claudia kept a physical book. Names. Transfers. Every life they ruined. Olivia's pulse spiked. Proof. Real proof. Irene nodded, eyes fierce despite the tremor in her hands. That ledger is locked in Claudia's office at the housing authority. If we find it, we expose everything. Olivia looked down at the note, then back at Irene. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt something stronger than fear. Resolve. Let's get it, Olivia said. Tonight. The housing authority building stood dark and silent, its concrete walls reflecting the thin glow of the streetlights. Olivia and Irene parked 2 blocks away, keeping to the quiet side streets as they approached the service entrance. Irene's steps were slow but unwavering. She had waited years for this night. A small keycard hung from a faded lanyard around her neck. Vera gave me this before she died, Irene whispered. I never had the courage to use it, until now. The card reader blinked red, then green. The lock clicked. They slipped inside. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and old paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering weakly. Irene led Olivia through the maze of narrow corridors, past bulletin boards with outdated notices and rows of darkened cubicles. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every shadow felt like a threat. When they reached the executive wing on the 3rd floor, Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. A frosted glass door bore the name Claudia Sterling, Deputy Director. Irene glanced up and down the hall, then nodded. Go on. Olivia turned the handle. To her shock, it opened without resistance. Claudia, in her arrogance, must have believed no one would dare enter. The office was immaculate, sleek desk, perfect stacks of paper, blinds tightly drawn. Nothing out of place, nothing human. Irene whispered. Vera said Claudia kept the ledger in a wall safe, something she didn't upload to the system. Olivia scanned the walls until her gaze landed on a large framed award hanging slightly crooked, too crooked for someone as meticulous as Claudia. She lifted it carefully. Behind it was a small steel safe bolted into the wall, keypad glowing faintly in the dark. Irene's breath caught. Try the founding year. Claudia reused it for everything. Olivia typed the digits. The keypad paused. Then, click. The safe door swung open. Inside lay a thick gray leather notebook. The Gray Ledger. Olivia reached in, hands trembling. They had it. Proof of everything. Olivia carried the heavy gray notebook to Claudia's desk, her pulse pounding in her ears. Irene hovered beside her, gripping the edge of the table for support. For years, the truth had been locked behind polished doors and smiling public speeches. Now it sat in front of them, thick enough to crush a life. Olivia opened the ledger. The first pages listed addresses and transfer codes, harmless at a glance. But further in, the language shifted. Clinical notations, abbreviations, names reduced to lines in a quiet bureaucratic system. And next to each entry was a single column labeled status. Resolved. Closed. Transferred. Olivia flipped page after page until Irene suddenly inhaled sharply. There her daughter's name. Vera Porter. Acquisition complete. Property reassigned. Status permanently closed. Irene pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Olivia gently placed her other hand over Irene's, grounding her through the storm. They turned one more page. At the bottom of the next entry, Olivia's breath caught. Parker, Olivia? Initial assessment complete. Accounts restricted. Primary residence reassigned. Status pending finalization. She felt physically ill. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't a spontaneous betrayal. It was a planned process. A system. A pattern. Olivia pulled out her phone and began taking photos as fast as she could. Every page. Every signature. Every timestamp. Just as she snapped the last photo, the overhead lights flickered. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Irene's eyes widened. They know, she whispered. A shadow moved under the door. Someone turned the knob. The office door swung open with a calmness that chilled Olivia to the bone. Evan Sterling stepped inside, shoulders relaxed, expression smooth, almost polite. But his eyes were sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. "I expected more from you," he said quietly, "but I suppose desperation makes people stupid." Irene stepped in front of Olivia, her voice trembling but fierce. "You will not touch her." Evan's smirk didn't waver. "Move, Irene." When she didn't, he shoved her aside. Irene fell against the filing cabinet with a sharp gasp. Olivia rushed toward her, but Evan grabbed her wrist and twisted. The pain shot up her arm, forcing a cry from her throat. Her phone fell and skidded across the floor. Evan lunged for it. Olivia dove after him, sliding on her knees, fingers brushing the phone a split second before his hand reached it. She clutched it to her chest, but he grabbed her hair, yanking her head back with brutal force. "You think you can destroy us?" His voice was a low snarl near her ear. "You think anyone will believe you over my mother?" His grip tightened. And then a dull crack split the air. Evan froze. Irene, shaking, breathless, stood behind him, clutching the heavy glass paperweight from Claudia's desk. She swung it again, striking his shoulder. Evan stumbled and collapsed to the floor. He wasn't unconscious, but he was dazed. Olivia grabbed the ledger and her phone. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Security. Irene's face went pale. "Go," she whispered urgently. "Now." Olivia hesitated for half a second. Irene pushed her toward the side door. "Run." Olivia ran, clutching the evidence, the sound of guards closing in behind her, and Irene's voice echoing in her chest like a final plea. "Do not let them win." Olivia did not stop running until she reached the stairwell at the end of the hall. She flew down 3 flights, burst through a maintenance exit, and stumbled into the cold dawn air. Her lungs burned, her legs shook, but she didn't dare slow down. Not until she was blocks away, and swallowed by the waking city. She found refuge in a small coffee shop opening for the morning shift. While her hands trembled around a cup of hot tea, she plugged in her dying phone. When the screen lit up, the images she had taken glowed back at her page after page of the gray ledger. Proof, undeniable proof. She printed 5 full sets at a nearby copy shop, each page crisp and clear. Then she checked the time. Almost noon. Claudia Sterling was scheduled to receive a public service award at the Civic Center auditorium. A perfect stage. Olivia arrived moments before the ceremony began. The lobby bustled with reporters, local officials, and community members eager to shake Claudia's hand. Olivia walked straight down the main aisle, ignoring the startled ushers trying to stop her. Claudia sat center stage, polished in an ivory suit, smiling for cameras. When she saw Olivia approaching, the color drained from her face. She gave a subtle nod to security. But she wasn't fast enough. Olivia stepped onto the stage and took the microphone from the stunned host. "My name is Olivia Parker. I married Evan Sterling 12 days ago, and I am here because everything you think you know about this family is a lie." A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Claudia rose to her feet. "Remove her now." Olivia opened the ledger and lifted her voice. "This book contains the names of every person the Sterlings tricked, ruined, and erased. 8 victims, including Vera Porter." Gasps filled the auditorium. A man stood abruptly, tears in his eyes. "Vera was my niece." Reporters rushed closer. Cameras flashed. Olivia continued. "Claudia Sterling used her position to steal homes, forge transfers, and cover the tracks of her son's crimes. Here is the evidence." Security hesitated, overwhelmed by the eruption of voices: outrage, disbelief, recognition. Behind Olivia, Claudia's mask cracked. Her voice rose, sharp with panic. "This is fabrication. She is mentally unwell." But the truth was already loose in the room, and there was no pulling it back. The auditorium dissolved into chaos. Reporters surged toward the stage. Audience members shouted questions. Others cried out as they recognized names from the ledger: neighbors, friends, family members who had vanished or lost everything without explanation. Police officers exchanged tense looks before stepping forward. The chief himself walked up the steps of the stage, eyes locked on Claudia. "Mom, I need you to come with us." Claudia backed away, shaking. "You have no authority. This is absurd. That woman is unstable. She is." But her voice cracked under the weight of 100 staring eyes. Evan, dragged in moments later by 2 officers, screamed Olivia's name like a threat, but the crowd drowned him out with angry cries. For the first time, the Sterling family had no shield left to hide behind. Within days, the district attorney opened a full investigation. Every fraudulent transfer was overturned. Every victim's family was contacted. The ledgers, the signatures, the timestamps all aligned perfectly with the stories of missing or displaced tenants. Gloria was released without charges and embraced Olivia with a flood of relief and gratitude. Olivia returned to her apartment with shaking hands. The locks had been changed back. Her belongings restored. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting the familiar scent of eucalyptus and magnolia steady her. It no longer felt like a remnant of her old life, but the beginning of a new one. She placed a small vase of fresh white lilies on the windowsill and whispered, mostly to herself, "I made it back." That night, she recorded her closing message. Sometimes survival begins with listening to the voice that tells you something is wrong. Sometimes courage starts with running. And sometimes justice begins with one person refusing to stay silent. If this story moved you, please like, share, and tell me where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Remember, you're stronger than the trap you're in. Always.